Somewhere in the world right now, there's a garden that almost no insect bothers.
It isn't sealed, it isn't sprayed. There are no nets, no traps. The aphids don't arrive in clouds. The hornworms don't appear overnight. The cabbage moths circle once and drift off towards someone else's garden down the road. From a distance, it looks ordinary. Some tomatoes, a row of beans, a few flowers scattered between the vegetables in a way that almost looks accidental. It isn't accidental. Every plant in that garden has been placed there for a reason. Some of them are food. Most of them are something else. They're guards. They're decoys. They're chemical signal towers, broadcasting messages into the air that insects can read and respond to. The gardener didn't build a defense system around the food. The gardener built it out of the food and the plants that live alongside it. This is companion planting for pest control. And the strange thing isn't that it works, it's how. Because the gardener isn't doing the protecting. The plants are, they evolved this long before there were gardens. We're just finally paying attention.
Once you know what to look for, every pest-resistant garden is doing the same three things.
The first strategy is repulsion. Some plants release volatile compounds into the air that specific insects simply cannot tolerate. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that harms them. The chemistry just makes the surrounding airspace unpleasant or disorienting to the insect's sensory system, and the insect leaves. It's the difference between a room you'd rather not sit in and a room you actively walk out of. Marigolds do this. Garlic does this. Many of the strong-smelling herbs in your kitchen evolved these compounds for exactly this reason, not for human cooking, but to push small leaf eaters away. The second strategy is masking. This one is more subtle and arguably more elegant. Pests don't find their host plants by accident. A cabbage moth doesn't see a cabbage. It smells one, picking up the specific scent compounds that cabbages, broccoli, and kale release into the air, sometimes from hundreds of feet away. When you surround that cabbage with strongly aromatic plants, the air around the bed gets noisy. The pest's scent map turns to static. It can't lock onto the target. It moves on. The third strategy is recruitment. This is the one most gardeners don't realize is happening. Certain plants, especially those with tiny clustered flowers like dill, fennel, yarrow, and sweet alyssum, produce nectar that attracts the adult forms of predator insects, ladybugs, lacewings, parasitic wasps. These insects are the natural counterweight to the pests you don't want. They lay their eggs in or near pest populations, and their larvae take care of the rest. By planting their food source, you're not just hoping a ladybug shows up. You're advertising, repel, mask, recruit. Every plant we're about to meet falls into at least one of these categories. The best of them fall into two. And a handful of legendary garden companions, the ones every experienced grower keeps coming back to, do all three at once.
Start with the marigold.
The unassuming, almost decorative French marigold, Targetes patula, has been used by gardeners for centuries before anyone understood why it worked. Today, we know. The roots of marigolds release a compound called alpha-terthionyl into the surrounding soil, and it's remarkably effective against root knot nematodes, microscopic underground pests that quietly damage the roots of tomatoes, peppers, beans, and potatoes, often without the gardener ever knowing why their crops are struggling. Above ground, marigolds release a strong scent profile that whiteflies, aphids, and certain beetles actively avoid. A border of marigolds around a vegetable bed isn't a decoration, it's a perimeter.
Garlic does something similar from a different chemical family.
Its leaves and bulbs contain sulfur compounds, the same ones that make your eyes water when you chop it, and these compounds drift into the air around the plant. Aphids, spider mites, and cabbage loopers find this airspace deeply unappealing. Planted between rows of lettuce, near roses, or interspersed in a bed of brassicas, garlic becomes a slow, continuous broadcast that small, soft-bodied insects steer away from.
And there's basil. Most gardeners plant it because it goes with tomatoes on the same plate.
They don't realize it also goes with tomatoes in the bed. And for the same chemical reason, humans love its smell. Basil releases volatile oils, particularly eugenol and linalool, that disrupt the orientation of hornworms, whiteflies, and certain types of fruit flies. A few basil plants tucked between tomato vines aren't just adding flavor to the garden, they're making it harder for the moths that lay hornworm eggs to find the tomatoes in the first place.
Mint joins the family, but with one warning.
Mint is one of the strongest natural insect repellents you can grow. Its oils push back ants, aphids, cabbage moths, and even mice. But mint will also try to take over the garden if you let it. Always grow it in a pot, sunk into the bed if you want, but contained. The mint will do its job from inside the pot. What every plant in this category has in common is that they work without effort, without action from the gardener, and without harming the pests they push away. The insects simply decide to be somewhere else, and in a garden, that decision is everything. To understand the second strategy, you have to understand how pests actually find their food. A cabbage moth is not flying around looking for green things, it's flying around looking for a specific molecule. Most pest insects locate their host plants by detecting volatile compounds, airborne chemicals that broadcast in the molecular equivalent of a smell exactly what species is growing nearby. A cabbage releases glucosinolates that drift downwind. A tomato releases a distinctive blend of terpenes. A carrot releases compounds so specific that the carrot fly evolved a sensory system tuned to almost nothing else. To the pest, a vegetable garden isn't a green space. It's a glowing map of scent signatures, each one pointing at a meal. Masking works by jamming that map. The classic example is interplanting carrots with onions or chives. The carrot fly is one of the most destructive pests in the carrot family. Its larvae tunnel into the roots and ruin the crop. But the carrot fly finds its target almost entirely through scent. When onions or chives are planted between the carrot rows, the air above the bed becomes a mixture of carrot signal and alyssum signal, and the fly's scent receptors get conflicting information. It struggles to lock on. Many of them give up and search elsewhere. The same logic explains why so many traditional European herb gardens were laid out the way they were. Thyme planted near cabbages, rosemary near beans, sage near brassicas. These weren't decorative choices. The strongly aromatic herbs flooded the air around the vegetables, and the pests that specialize in those vegetables had a much harder time finding them. Nasturtiums add an interesting wrinkle to this strategy. Their leaves release a peppery compound that some pests find disorienting, but more importantly, their bright flowers and broad leaves dominate the visual field around a bed. For pests that locate their hosts using both scent and visual cues, certain whiteflies, some beetles, a patch of nasturtiums acts as visual noise on top of olfactory noise. The garden becomes harder to read. What makes masking so effective is that it doesn't fight the pest. It just makes the pest's job harder. And in nature, an insect that can't find its host quickly will almost always move on to easier targets. There's always a less protected garden somewhere down the road.
The third strategy is the one that surprises gardeners the most because it inverts everything you would expect about defending a garden.
You don't push the pests away. You don't hide from them. You invite something else in, something that handles the problem for you. Quietly, continuously, without any further effort on your part. This is the strategy of the recruiter plants, and the moment you understand it, your idea of a productive garden changes forever. Almost every common garden pest has a natural counterpart in the insect world. Aphids are food for ladybugs, lacewings, and hoverfly larvae. Caterpillars on cabbage are food for parasitic wasps. Spider mites have predatory mites. Whiteflies, thrips, and small beetle larvae all have specialist predators, tiny insects that exist for the sole purpose of finding and feeding on them. These beneficial insects are already in the landscape around you. The question is just whether your garden gives them a reason to stay. And the answer almost always is nectar. Adult predator insects don't eat pests. Their larvae do. The adults need a different food source, typically the small accessible nectar found in tiny flat-topped flower clusters. Without these flowers, the predator insects fly through, glance at your garden, and keep going. With them, they stay, lay their eggs near the pest populations, and a generation of biological pest control hatches a few days later. The plants that do this best are surprisingly specific. Dill and fennel, with their wide flat umbels of yellow flowers, are among the most powerful predator attractants you can grow. They pull in parasitic wasps and hoverflies in particular. Yarrow does the same, with the bonus that it tolerates poor soil and drought. Sweet alyssum, with its low carpet of tiny white flowers, is the favorite of hoverfly adults, and hoverfly larvae are among the most efficient aphid eaters on Earth. Cilantro, calendula, and buckwheat all do similar work when allowed to flower. Notice what these plants have in common. They're small-flowered, they cluster, they bloom for long stretches. And almost none of them are the showy flowers you'd pick for a bouquet. The plants doing the heaviest defensive work in a garden are usually the ones a tidy gardener would have weeded out.
You're not just planting flowers, you're staffing your garden. So, how do you actually build this in your garden?
You don't need a botanical degree, and you don't need to plant 50 species. The most effective companion planting gardens in the world tend to follow a simple rule. Every vegetable bed gets at least one repeller, one masker, and one recruiter. 3 roles, 3 plants, 1 network. Once you see it that way, the entire layout becomes almost obvious. Take the most common garden bed on Earth, the tomato bed. The repeller is basil, planted between the tomato vines, releasing the volatile oils that disrupt hornworm moths and whiteflies. The masker is garlic or chives, tucked at the base of the tomatoes, scrambling the scent signature of the bed. And the recruiter, planted at the corners or as a border, is a patch of flowering dill or sweet alyssum, hosting the hoverflies and parasitic wasps that handle aphid populations before they ever take hold. 3 plants, 3 jobs, almost no work from you. Now scale that thinking to a brassica bed, cabbages, broccoli, kale. These are some of the most pest-attracting vegetables you can grow. The cabbage moth, the cabbage looper, the aphid colonies on the underside of leaves. The repeller is mint or thyme, kept in pots and placed around the bed. The masker is dill or chamomile, planted directly among the cabbages. Both confuse the moth's scent map and recruit parasitic wasps at the same time, which is why they are considered legendary brassica companions. The recruiter is a row of sweet alyssum along the front edge. The bed essentially defends itself. A bean and squash bed wants different partnerships. Beans are vulnerable to bean beetles and aphids. Squash attracts squash bugs and cucumber beetles. The repeller here is rosemary or sage along the border. The masker is nasturtium, which doubles as a decoy. Squash bugs and aphids often prefer the nasturtium leaves to the actual crop, so the nasturtium absorbs the pressure. The recruiter is a clump of flowering yarrow or cilantro, allowed to bolt and bloom near the bed. A few principles tie the whole system together. Plant in patches, not single specimens. 1 marigold is decoration. A cluster of marigolds is a chemical signal. Place flowering herbs at the edges of beds where they can bloom continuously without shading your vegetables. Stagger your dill, fennel, and cilantro so something is always in flower. Predator insects need a continuous food supply, not a single week of bloom. And let some of your herbs flower, even when culinary wisdom says to pinch them back. A flowering basil or coriander stops being food for you and starts being stuff for the garden. The result, over a single season, is a garden that looks slightly wilder than your neighbors, slightly less tidy, and quietly, dramatically, less troubled by pests. Think about the garden we started with, the one no insect bothered. From the outside, it looked accidental. A few flowers between the vegetables, some herbs scattered around. But now you know. Every plant was doing a job. The marigolds were holding the perimeter. The basil was disrupting the moths. The dill was hosting the parasitic wasps. The alyssum was feeding the hoverflies whose larvae were quietly handling the aphids before they ever became a problem. The gardener wasn't fighting pests. The gardener had assembled the right team and let them work. That's the real shift. You stop seeing your garden as a crop you have to protect and start seeing it as a network you get to design. If this changed how you think, watch the other side of the story next. The plants you should never plant together, and what happens when you get the pairings wrong. That video is on the screen now. The garden was never supposed to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be a system. Now you know how to build one.
If this helped, subscribe for more plant education, and I'll see you in the next one.